Hi, I'm Ike Ellis. Now we're going to talk about migrating an on-premise SQL Server to an Azure VM to IAAS. So already we've introduced Azure, we've looked at planning the project and what that entails, we've discussed preparing for network capabilities like we need Azure Express Route, and we need Active Directory and security things taken care of, shrinking the database, paying off technical debt. And finally, we're ready to actually do a migration. So this is our fourth video, and we're going to migrate into a VM. In later videos, we'll look at migrating to an Azure SQL Database Managed instance, and we'll look at migrating to an Azure SQL Database, and then we'll look at post-migration cleanup. So this section is pretty demo-filled. We'll look at creating a VM and the things that go into creating a VM. We'll look at configuring tempdb appropriately. We'll look at backup and restore, so backing up on on-premise database and restoring it in Azure. We'll look at using Azure Blob storage to do that. We'll look at migrating SQL agent jobs and logins. And then finally, we'll look at how to do a low downtime to no downtime migration, some of our options for doing that. So with that, let's actually create a VM. So I'm going to open up the Azure portal. Let me bring that over here. So portal, log in real quick. And now I'm going to create a VM. So I click here. Let me do that again in case I was too fast. See create resource, the plus symbol. I'm going to click create a resource. And then I could, if I do VM here, I'm going to get a whole bunch of options. But you're never going to find the one you want here. So what you actually want to search for under new is not VM, but rather SQL Server 2019. So when you do that, you'll see anything in red is likely the image that you're looking for. So if you want Linux, you can get a Linux VM up and running. I'm going to do SQL Server 2019 on Windows 2019 and click that. Now, I get a quick blurb here about what that is, and I click create. Okay, your first option is to choose the subscription you'll be using. Next, you'll use a resource group. Remember, that's the organization where I put all my things in so I can clean it up easily later. I'm going to use SQL bits. For virtual machine name, I'll call mine SQL Server 2019 SQL bits test, something like that. You choose your location. West US 2 is where my resource group is, so that's where I put it. Now, availability options, this is the first hard question where it says, what would you like? An availability zone, and it says which one would you like, zone 1, 2, or 3, or an availability set, and you can add one if you'd like. What does that mean? So let's go back to our slides real quick. So availability zones are separate infrastructure inside each region. So if the region is West US 2, there are 3 zones in West US 2. And each zone has its own power, cooling, and networking. Now, power and cooling makes sense, but what's networking? Well, their connection to the internet might be provided by a different service provider. So that way, if AT&T goes down, another ISP is still up and running on a different zone in that region. So the point is, when you choose an availability zone, you're choosing which one of these infrastructure components you're going to be putting your VM on. The reason why that's kind of cool is if you want to create like an always-on availability group, you can make one server in one zone and another server in another zone, and that way they're kind of fault tolerant from each other. If one zone goes down, the other zone is still up and running, and you're still up and running. So this really helps you achieve your SLAs. In addition, Microsoft commits that won't update all the zones all at once. So Microsoft has to do its own maintenance, right? Its own upgrades, right? And it will upgrade them one at a time and wait for one zone to come up before it updates the other one. An availability set is similar to an availability zone, but at a smaller component. So think of availability sets almost like racks, where you're going to put a VM in each rack. And Microsoft makes a similar commitment. They say, okay, if you put a VM in one part of the set and a VM in a different part of the set, we won't upgrade them both at the same time. We'll upgrade them one at a time. So if you want more documentation, there's a link here in the slides that you'll have access to. And you should use availability zones and availability sets to configure your high availability SLAs. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's go back to creating the VM. We're going to leave it at no because this is just a single VM that we're creating. Now, notice that by default it says SQL Server 2019 Web on SQL Server 2019 Gen 1, which I don't want the web version. I don't know why that's the default, but I click Browse All, and then I can type in SQL Server 2019, and look at all the red here that I can choose from, right? Tons of different red, all this red, this is all SQL 2019. Okay, the one I'm gonna choose though is, which one? How about this one? Free SQL Server 2019 Developer. Not on Ubuntu though. How about this one? On Windows, I'll do that one. Okay, so I'm getting the Developer Edition, which doesn't charge me SQL licensing on Windows. Now, there's a lot of options here, some of which might be interesting to you, some not, but the one that you really need to pay close attention to is select size. So I'm using a cheap one, 2 VPUs and 8 gigs of RAM, but I could easily wrap this up if I needed to. And I can see all sizes here, and you can see, look at all the sizes that we have available here. So general purpose, memory optimized, so on and so forth. And you can see that coming down kind of deep into like the F series, you know, they're $3,000 a month, or even more than that. Let's look at this one, $50,000 a month for the M series. That's 208 VPUs, 5,700 gigs of RAM, and you know, $86,000 a month, right? So we won't choose that one because I'll run out of money and I won't be able to retire. So we'll just keep it at the $137 a month. Okay, for the administrator account, you put in your account. I don't like that it requires such a long password, but whatever. Okay. You can specify your inbound port rules. I do like to have RDP available, so I'm going to click yes. Yeah, let's have RDP there. Licensing, would you like to use an existing Windows Server licensing? Again, that's the hybrid cloud benefit, and that saves us a lot of money. And then our next option, we just filled out the basic information. Let's do the disk information. So remember earlier when we did our preparation section, we said that choosing the disks was really important, but it could be really expensive. So for the operating system, what should we choose? Again, premium and standard for our purposes. We probably want to stay away from standard HDD. It's really slow. Maybe it's good for dev and test, but like I said earlier, probably not even then. And then networking. Now, this is a very important point, and it's if you mess up the networking, you have to do everything over again. So some of these options you can change after the VM is already created and installed and even migrated. Everything could be built and running, and you could say, I want better disks, or I want to do something different. But networking is a pain. You really need to get the networking correct at creation. If you need to change networking, you often need to redeploy everything and do it all over again. So make sure you think about this clearly. One thing to note, though, is you don't have to have a public IP. So remember, if you have a connection from your data center into Azure, either it's a VPN or it's express route. You have the network infrastructure guys do that for you. Once that's done, then you can choose to remove the public IP on your VM, which is an excellent idea for a SQL server. Very, very secure. For me, though, I'm going to leave the public IP open because otherwise I won't get access to this thing. Okay. And then accelerated networking. My VM doesn't get accelerated networking, so I have to leave it off. But in a high-load transactional system, you should definitely turn this on. So pick a VM that supports it because you'll get a significant network performance advantage. And then come back here. We can go look at management. Now, a lot of the management stuff is probably not super important. In a dev environment, you might want auto shutdown. so that it shuts down at a specific time every day, right? That way you're not getting billed at night. So maybe you shut down dev, test, and stage, and then you turn it on when you get in the morning, or you have a script to turn it on or something like that. That might save a lot of money, and you should really consider it. You could also have Microsoft handle the patching for you and not do manual patching. That's also a very good idea. Let's see, is there anything in advance that I really care about? I don't think so. So SQL Server settings. Again, you can open up the SQL Server ports. You can start SQL authentication. It picks up your username and password from the first screen over here. You can enable Key Vault integration. Azure Key Vault is a way of storing secrets in Azure. Like a good example would be encryption keys if you're doing always encrypted. So having Key Vault integration means that that Key Vault is always available to you in Transact SQL and when you cycle keys. And that is pretty cool. It's a pretty cool feature. This isn't an always encrypted course, but if you don't know about it, you should learn more about it. It's pretty neat. Now, under storage, pay attention here because this can get expensive, but it's also very important. Just like I talked about earlier, you click Change Configuration, and now you get to specify where does your data go, a premium SSD. Where does your log go? Now, it could also go to an ultra disk if your region and account support it. That's the very high IOPS, high throughput. Now, tempdb, it says use the local SSD. Remember, that was in our best practices. Just use the local SSD attached to the VM and click OK. That's fine. Now, when do you want to do automated patching? Sunday at 2 for us is fine. And then the next part is tags. So do you remember how a resource group allowed me to organize all of my different products and services inside the resource group? There's a further way of organization by tagging, because once you are in Azure for a while and you have hundreds and hundreds of things available to you, you're going to have difficulty searching for what you're looking for. So you can use tags to search for things. Like a good tag might be a dev environment, or it might be this is Ike's box, or whatever you're going to put in here. You can put a name and a value there and then search by that tag if you need to. And then you click Review and Create. And I don't know what's missing. Oh, I said availability set, but really I want none. Okay, there we go. Review and Create. It says, oh, it looks like you've got a good system here, and you click Create, and it creates. Now, it takes a little bit to spin up, so I'm not going to actually spin it up. But what I want to show you is that earlier, I went through this already, and I created a VM. Where is it? This is the SQL Server Ike VM. And so if you go to one of your VMs that you've already created, hang on one second, you can connect to it. When you connect to it with RDP, Chrome downloads an RDP connection for you. And if I go to my downloads, oh, come on, download the RDP, there it is, okay. I can click on it. I get my RDP connection screen. It asks for my username and password, so I'll just say use a different account. It's Ike. And it showed up on my other monitor, but here I am RDPing into the VM that I created earlier, which is pretty cool in my opinion. All right, that's it. We just created our first VM. We paid attention to storage and networking like we said we would. And now let's go on to our next demo. So in SQL 2019, tempdb is configured with pretty good defaults. You'll get 4 files, they'll be separate, you'll have pretty good performance. But your workload may require different tempdb configurations. You can go and change tempdb after SQL's been installed in the VM, no problem, right? Or you can use Mike Petrie's script, FlogDonkey on GitHub. He wrote a script called move tempdb.sql. And if you just put in the parameters with how many files you want and the size that you want and the location that you're looking for, it will move it and create the files for you. It's a pretty good script. A lot of people recommend using it. So there you go. I've got the URL and the slide deck if you need it. And you can use that script to configure tempdb according to your organization's specifications. Okay, now we're actually going to migrate a on-premise SQL database into Azure. After all that work, all that planning and preparation and paying off technical debt and adding compression and everything that we just did, getting ExpressRoute, all of it, now we're ready to migrate. And here's the easy way to migrate. So on-premise, I connect to my server, I right-click on the database that I want to migrate, I go to Tasks, Backup, and then what do I back up to? Well, hang on one second. I back up to a disk. Hang on one second. Let me remove the existing thing. Click Add. Have my file location path of where I'm going to be backing up to. I'll just pick my D drive. We'll just call it tsql v5 version 2.bak, something like that. Click OK. Click OK. Click OK again, and it backs up. Okay. Now let's go to that file path real quick. Okay, here's the file path, and you'll see the tsql version 2 BAK. What I can do is just copy it, go into my VM in Azure, and paste it. And it pastes the BAK right in there. And now what I can do is I can go on my databases in my VM. I'm still in my RDP session in my VM. I right-click, I restore the database from a device. Which one? Well, let me go find that file that I just restored. I did it on my F drive. There's the T-SQL. Click OK. Click OK. And now that database is restored and ready to go. Now there's some other things we have to do, obviously, but you get the idea. The data's there and it's in Azure. We did a successful migration. Now, that was one way to do it. And obviously, if you had 5 or 10 databases, you wouldn't want to do it by hand like that. Also, you know, that would incur significant downtime, obviously, right? Because you'd have to back it up, kick everybody off the system, restore it, then repoint everything, and then bring it all back online again, right? So that would take some time. I think it might be a good idea for us to learn how to back up and restore to URL. So here, if I go back to my original backup here, you'll notice that when I right-click Task and I back up, if I click URL and click Add, it allows me to choose a storage account in Azure. If I click New Container, I can sign into Azure. I can select my storage account. So why don't we go ahead and do that? I'll sign in right now. Oh, sorry. Actually, I don't want to do that. Let's change the user. Okay, so I'm going to sign in right now. Okay, and then once there, it lets me ideally choose a storage account. I'm not sure why it's not letting me. I see it's picked up my old user. Maybe it hasn't just refreshed just quite yet. But anyway, it'll let me pick a storage account, a blob container. Oh, let's see if it worked now. Yep, there it is. So I can pick a storage account, a blob container, and I can back up to Azure. That means that the actual file is going to go into Azure already. So from on-premise into Azure, the BAK will be up there, and then from Azure, I can pull it off the BAK and put it into the VM immediately. This would be super cool if we were going to back up a BAK and a bunch of TRNs up there so that the data is already up there, and then we restore them gradually, and then when the time comes to switch over, we just have to restore the final TRN, which allows for a much smaller downtime to do that, right? So we could potentially do this. Now, I just wanted to show you the GUI for doing this, but I think it's probably more beneficial if we see the T-SQL for doing it, right? So let's take a look at the T-SQL. Before we look at the T-SQL though, let's go back to the Azure portal real quick and talk about storage accounts. So remember, I'm in the Azure portal. In order to be able to back up an on-premise SQL database into Azure, I need a storage account to hold the file. So if I click create a resource And again, I search for what I want to create. I can click storage. And in my options, you can see storage account, create. So here, I choose my resource group, right? SQL bits, just like everything else. Storage account name, I'll call SQL bits Ike. Okay. Put it in the West US. That's where my VM is. That's where my disks are. Everything's in the same data center. We want that there for, speed and latency. Okay. I don't need to make this geo-redundant because it's just my backup files for migration. So I'm going to save some money and make it locally redundant. You get to choose between cool and hot storage. Cool is slower and cheaper, and hot is faster and more expensive. I'll just leave it for hot for now. Now, one cool thing about a storage account, just like the VM, I can remove the public endpoint. So again, you're backing up here, and that's real production data that could be vulnerable. So you might want to remove the public endpoint so that you don't expose this data to the internet, right? You only want the data to go over ExpressRoute, only over a private endpoint. For me, though, I'm going to leave the public endpoint there. For data protection, you can turn off deletes for these if you don't want it to delete. You might have an audit compliance thing that says nobody deletes backups for whatever reason. Or you can have soft deletes for file shares. You can turn on versioning, so if anybody changes something, you can see what they changed. And then I don't know that we care anything about advanced really right now. We're not an ADLS course. I can talk all day about that. Okay, let's go ahead and create it. So we go ahead and we click create. And now that storage account is going to get created. Storage accounts typically get created pretty quickly, so we don't have to wait too long before the storage account is available to us to see and use. There we go. There's SQL bits Ike. It's accepted. And done. Okay. So let's go to the resource here now that it's created. This storage account allows us to create all kinds of things. We can create file shares and tables and queues, but what we want is a container for blobs. So we click container, and then once we're there, see how there's no containers yet? If I click container, I can type SQL backups. So now I'm going to create a new container to hold blobs called SQL backups. So let's go back to the overview of my storage account. My storage account, the full name is in the SQL bits resource group, and it is, let's go to access keys. It's called SQL bits Ike. That's the storage account name. Now, every storage account has a key. You take the name and the key, and that's how you gain access to the storage account. So what we want to do is back up our database in this storage account, but first we have to have our on-premise SQL server have an account that allows it to connect to Azure. So I'm going to go back to SSMS, and I've got a file here that I used recently. Okay. In order to connect the on-premise SQL database to that storage account, you put the name of the storage account here and the key here. So in my case, remember, my name is SQL bits Ike. If I click this button here, it will copy it for me. I come back here, it copies it. The key, I click here, it copies the key. Now, I put that there. Uh-oh. How come it didn't copy the key? There it is, there's the key. Now, I click F5. Oh, let's change that credential. We'll call it SQL backup SQL bits. There we go. All right, I create that credential. Boom, created. Now I want to back up the T-SQL version 5 database. By the way, the credential only needs to be created one time. So once you create it, you're done. You don't have to create it again. So now I want to back up the database T-SQL version 5 to a URL. What's the URL? Okay, this is a great question. Storage accounts, when they are public, have a URL .blob.core.windows.net. And remember, I named mine, if we go back to the thing, it's SQL bits Ike. So I'll say SQL bits Ike. Okay? And then the folder that I put it in, if you remember, when I come down here and I look at my containers, the folder is called SQL backups. So here, I'll change this to SQL backups. The file I'm calling tsql version 5.1.bak, and the account, it says with credential. Well, the with credential is right up here. So let's make sure that that matches up here on line 1 down here at the last line. Now I do that and I click execute, and it backs up this database into Blob storage. When I go back to the Azure portal and I click on that container, you can see that file just got created right now, and now that file is available to use. We did a successful backup, and we could script this. We could script the TRNs the same way, right? Same credential. We could script 20 database backups, get them up there just the same way, right? In fact, even without migration, saving your backups into Blob storage is a great idea. You're not going to find a cheaper storage area. Your SAN's certainly not cheaper. It takes a lot of disk pressure off your organization, and now you've got a really safe, good place where you can have backups saved for a long time. Okay, now I'm going to go back to RDP. Okay, I'm going to delete this database because I'm about to recreate it again. You just saw me do it by hand, but now let's do it by a script. So I'm going to right click and we'll do a restore. Okay, the credential should be the same one that I had before. So I'm going to copy it from the on-premise one, go back here, and let's put the credential back the right way. Okay. Let's go ahead and create that credential and see if it works. It does. Okay. Now we need to change the URL a little bit. So the URL, this URL, dude here, we'll grab that whole line. We'll take this. There we go. The credential is SQL backup, SQL bits. We know that, yeah, we're going to move it to the right file location. Everything here looks good. This should probably work. Let's try the restore. Click execute. Yep, it's going to work. Now we just restored that database. If we right click on databases, click refresh, and now that database is in our VM, and we restored it off of Blob storage. And again, you can script the restore just like this. Get all 20 databases up there just like this. Okay. So there you go. Now we've got a migrated database in Azure. We've accomplished a lot. Okay, let's see what's next. Okay, now that we've migrated the database, we're now ready to migrate 2 other things off the SQL Server that we're likely going to need. We're going to need SQL Server agent jobs, and we're going to need SQL logins. Now there might be other things that we want to migrate here, but we'll discuss those in a future video. So let's talk about jobs first. So here's the jobs. I have a job here called import daily sales summary. And what you could do with the job is just right click it, script the job as a create to a new query window. It opens up the job. It opens up the commands, who the owner is, the schedule, everything gets on the script. If you just copy and paste it, go into your VM, do a new query and paste it. Now you'll get an error message and it says the specified name already, oh well, pardon me, it says it already exists. I did it already. Just to kind of show you this, I'm going to delete this. I forgot that I did this already. It's kind of embarrassing, but oh well. You get to see the bad things. I want to show you this error. It says the login name is invalid. So one thing you're likely going to need to change is if your domain or login name is different. Most of the time it won't be. You probably won't have this problem, but because my machine is not in the same domain, I do have this problem. So I changed the name to something a little bit better for the owner login name here. And then I run it, right click, and boom, now you can see that job is there. So you know your jobs can migrate over. There's also ways to automatically migrate those jobs, but I just wanted to show you a quick and easy way to get this done right here. Another thing that we can do is we can migrate the logins. Now there's a support document for migrating logins. The trick to migrating a login is you want the same password. So if your SQL Server has a bunch of SQL authentication accounts, which is not a best practice, but let's face it, we do have those, and you want the passwords to not change because what a pain that would be, then you can follow this document and it will teach you how to do that. But the gist of it is this: if I'm on my on-premise SQL Server, you have a stored procedure here called rev login. And it creates this stored procedure for hashing the password and for creating a script to get the login. So I've already done this already. So when you run the store procedure, it generates output with all your logins here. And you take that output and copy it, and you go into your VM and do a new query window and paste it. And this is the black magic. This with password is the same password as your on-premise server. So when you go to run this, you'll get all the same logins and all the same passwords, and those things will be officially migrated over. So there you go. It's that easy to migrate SQL agent jobs and migrate logins for you. Now, there's one final thing to kind of talk about, and that is this. I have 2 links here of tutorials that I think you'll find useful. In fact, at the end of the class, I'll give you an opportunity to run through those tutorials with me guiding you in case you get jammed up. I've done these tutorials many times with many students. What you'll find is that Soliance, my company, that I'm the general manager of the data and AI practice. The company doesn't belong to me. It belongs to Zoiner Tejada and Michelle Bustamante and Brian Noyes. But we write a lot of Microsoft documentation. I think I mentioned that in my introduction video. So we write a lot of hackathons, a lot of workshops, a lot of tutorials, a lot of straight up guides and all sorts of stuff. And so a lot of the material we're kind of proud of because we wrote it. It is possible to create an always-on availability group where the primary is your on-premise SQL server and the secondary is the VM you created in Azure. It takes a little while, and this tutorial will guide you through it exactly. But when you do this tutorial, that means that when you go to migrate, all you have to do is just fail over to the secondary. Now the Azure VM is the primary, right? You're failed over, and you can just tear down the AG and get rid of the on-premise server if you want. This is an excellent way to migrate. And like I said, at the end of the day, you'll have time to do this tutorial if you'd like. A great way, because 1, you've got a failback method. If anything breaks, just bring it right back to on-premise. 2, you have no downtime. And 3, if you successfully set this up, you know that a whole lot of great things are working about your VM, meaning as it's a secondary, you're probably already looking at the load that the secondary is taking and say, oh, look, it can handle a production, transactions per second because they're all getting shipped over there. I mean, you're learning a lot by doing that. So this is an excellent way of doing an on-premise to VM migration that I highly, highly recommend. And you can look at the documentation. We'll look at that maybe together at the end of the class. It'll be interesting. All right. That's it for this module. Very quick, easy. We did all the prep work, and now this part was easy because the prep work was so good. And now we'll talk about migrating to a PaaS offering in the next video.